Hey everyone, this is Arabella back for another podcast episode of In My Musical Opinion. And today I am joined by our guest speaker, Jenna Blum. Jenna Blum is a New York Times bestseller, is one of Oprah's top 30 women writers, and you might be sitting there thinking, wait, writing? I thought we were talking about music. But in Jenna's case, they go together. And so with that, I want to hand it to Jenna to tell us a little bit about who she is, some of her writing expertise, and how that connects to music for today's episode.
Thank you, Arabella. I'm really happy to be here. So, Arabella and I connected because I was researching a historical novel called The Talent about a USO singer from World War II. And I've always wanted to sing, and I know nothing about singing. So, I came to her studio, and she was working with me in my very stubborn ignorance to try and help me learn not just about the physical act of singing, which is really fascinating to me and much more physical than I thought, but also about theory. So she is a terrific teacher, and I love when creatives cross pollinate. So I think it makes the whole creative community stronger when the musicians are talking to the writers, are talking to the visual artists, etc. I'm really extra grateful to be here.
Thank you so much. Tell us a little bit about what brought you to choose music as a topic.
I come from a musical family, or at least I come from a musical mother. My mom was a concert pianist who came from the farm towns of Minnesota, like the farmland of Minnesota. First went to the University of Minnesota on a scholarship and then went to Juilliard on a scholarship. And she was such an outlier in her family. Nobody else had any musical talent at all, but she was super talented. And so her talent brought her to New York. And I grew up hearing the myths about her musical career, and hearing her play Rachmaninoff was her favorite on her Steinway. And so I was suffused in music from a very early age.
Awesome. And she seems to have passed on that talent. And so, Jenna is a podcast expert in herself because she used some of that music knowledge to not only research for her book, but to write and work with podcast producers for The Key of Love. Can you tell us a little bit of that?
Yeah, The Key of Love is an original World War II audio drama, which is, boy, that's a mouthful, right? But what that means is it is a 6-episode podcast that I wrote about a singer named Libby, who in 1943 is a maid in the Grand Back Bay of Boston. And she works at the Fairmont Copley Hotel. And she is assigned to clean the room of a very famous composer named Francis Key, who's a relative of Francis Scott Key. And he's like this fatuous dude, but he composes well. And they have an affair. And the problem is Libby's already engaged to a soldier who's overseas. So I wrote this thing, and it was like deliciously schmaltzy. And I had such a good time doing it for this audio network. And then they put together the podcast and recorded it all with actors. So each part was read by a different actor. And that's something very unusual in the writing world. Usually you get one narrator for your audiobook, that's it. This was more like a play from the 40s that was brought to life, complete with sound effects. Like people walking across the floor would be like, knocking on the door, thunder, the whole thing. It was great. And they hired a composer to write an original song for the podcast called The Key of Love that Libby sings in one of the later episodes.
Awesome. So, did you have the opportunity to work with the composer or have sort of a hand in the production form of it? Or did you write it and then say, "Ooh, I'm excited to see what this turns out to be"? What was your role in that?
Yeah, I kind of wrote it and then sat back with my popcorn and watched other people bring it to life. And, I always had this conversation with my mom that she said, I am just the interpreter and you're the creator as the pianist. I'm only an interpreter. And I said, without you, what I do or what any composer would do is dots on a page. You're the one who actually translates it for the audience. And I feel the same way about The Key of Love. Like I wrote a script and then handed it off to the network, and they hired this fantastic composer named Dan Lipton, and he composed the music. And it was such a joy to me when I heard the podcast. I was walking my dog around Boston listening to it, and I started crying on the street because it's just so phenomenal to hear your imagination transposed in that way. Such an honor.
So cool. Were there any parts where you were like, I don't know if I envisioned it that way, but it kind of works.
No, weirdly, there weren't any parts like that. It was actually better than I expected. Often with an audiobook with a single voice narrator, if you have a man reading a woman's voice, he sounds kind of like he's in drag. And if you have a woman reading a man's voice, then she sounds like she's trying really hard to be a man. But because they cast it with male and female actors, it sounded like it did in my imagination. And there's kind of a saucy best friend character too, who's super spicy and has a Southie accent. And the way they cast this woman was so great. Like she made me cry with laughter listening to her. She was like super spice. So the whole thing was just really magical.
And for our listeners, if you're curious, we're going to link the podcast and some of the other Jenna's others work as well, so you can take a listen and read if you want to hear it come to life for yourself. Because I would definitely recommend. I think at this point, caught up to all of Jenna's works, but more to come. So I don't want to give away too much. I'll let Jenna make her own announcements as she does on her social and website. So make sure to follow that. But I have learned a lot from Jenna as a creative, and I put that in quotes because I struggle with that word, Jenna. I, you know, people label us as creatives, and I sit back and I say, well, I think everyone's kind of creative. It's just what you put your time and energy into. But you've gone full force into that world. So can you give us a little insight or tell us how you got on the path that you got to?
It's such an interesting thing to hear you struggle with that. It's one of the only ways I know to describe what I do. And most of the
Mm.
people I know, I say they're creative professionals or professional creatives. Like even on the dating apps, I'm like, if you're a creative professional, big bonus points,
Yeah.
because I feel as though people who dedicate their lives to surviving financially by doing some sort of creative endeavor are a special breed. And that was all I ever really wanted to do when I was a little girl. My dad was a writer, he was a news writer for CBS, NBC, ABC, for Walter Cronkite, for those of you old enough to remember who that was. And so I grew up listening to his typewriter, some little machine that we used to have to produce writing on. And I never wanted to be anything else except to be a writer like my dad. So there really wasn't any other track for me. And I was miserable at doing anything else. Also, I'm not good at doing other things except food service, which is what I was in for a decade or two while I was launching my writing career. And I still would love to work in restaurants. I love restaurants, I love food, but it's always been my track. And I encourage those of you who are creatives, who are creative professionals, who dedicate a lot of your time and resources to trying to grow or maintaining a creative career, like accept that label proudly because it's a tough gig and we do it out of love. And when it's going well or when you succeed, it's the best feeling in the whole world.
Mm. So I think that's really interesting and really important for the listeners to take home to embrace creativity as a field in itself. But I'll tell you why I struggle with it for myself. And maybe you have some advice for me on our pod today. Our listeners, I think, know at this point that I love music and I've studied it my whole life. But when I went to school, my intention wasn't to study to be a musician. I was studying for the business world. And then after that, moving into speech pathology for my master's, it still was very STEM heavy. And so when people turned to me and said, well, you're creative, yes, but I like a good spreadsheet and I'm interested in anatomy. And so I think the advice I would give before I turn it over to Jenna is they're not mutually exclusive.
I think that's totally right. Just because I'm not good at anything except writing and food service doesn't mean that you can't embrace all parts of your personality and your skill set. And also, I will say that during the pandemic, I started a company by mistake, like rather on impulse. I am obviously an author. I watched in horror in the opening days of the pandemic as the COVID-19 virus shut down my friends' in-person book tours. And so I threw up some social media pages and invited people who were publishing books to come on over, post about their books. And within a couple of weeks, it grew into a company with 35 people working on it, all volunteer, putting authors online. The company's called A Mighty Blaze. We're still doing it. Every single week, we interview authors of different genres. And the reason I mention this is not to blow the horn for the blaze, but to say I discovered a whole latent skill set for entrepreneurialism in myself. And I was shocked because I had never thought of myself as a business person, but I absolutely loved it. Like I was driving around the empty streets of the city listening to Guy Raz podcasts about how to maximize your company's potential. So I think not only should you embrace all parts of yourself if you are a creative, but there may be parts of yourself you have yet to discover as a creative, and that's a joy.
I took away two things from that. One is notice who Jenna said she was listening to. It wasn't just the business gurus, it was the business creatives that were putting out podcasts, who were writing books. Like there was a little bit of the arts in there, is what I would say. But the second thing I took away, and I'm going to frame it more as a question. I really struggle. I frame it as take my foot off the gas because when you're a creative, I feel like you have so many ideas and you see opportunities. You see a problem, for lack of a better word, and you try to address it in like four different ways. At least that's been my experience. You write about it, you talk about it, you're on social media. How do you focus?
That is an amazing question. My energy healer says I have massive vata energy, which means that I am all over the place all the time. She's like, it's partly because you're a Libra, but it's also because it's how you're built. Like, yeah, I'm kind of woo. And it's true. And I think that the society we live in that really engenders and encourages kind of blink speed attention doesn't help. Like I can walk into a room thinking I need my phone and I am suddenly making a chicken dish and then I'm like, oh, I should rearrange that cupboard. I mean, it's really terrible. What has helped me kind of bear down more is meditation. Like I take time out every day, at least 10 minutes a day, and usually only 10 minutes a day. But if I sit in meditation, I find it helps me find my center more and bring some of that vata energy back down. But I do think it's true that creatives, because our minds jump in a lot of different and maybe unexpected directions, often struggle with that. And I would say that creativity, like entrepreneurialism, is a highly variable concept. Like it requires kind of jumping around all over the place and it's wildly inefficient. You have to try 80 different things to get like the one solution. But I have come to embrace that part of the process and to understand like if I'm super excited about something one day, to kind of sit with it for a week and see if that idea or the strategy has evaporated or if it's still there. If it's still there, I can trust it.
It brings to mind something, and for those listening, I think tattoos are really interesting and also a form of art. So this is no way a criticism of them. But someone said to me when I was thinking about the possibility, and I don't have one right now, but when I was thinking about it, they said just sketch it in marker on your arm, and if you love it in a week or two, go put it in ink. And I feel the same way about things I do in the studio. If I put it down on paper and in a week, 2 weeks, whatever the time frame is, and I still love it, I'm going to put it in ink. And if I don't, on to the next sketch.
I love that strategy. I feel the same way. It's why I don't have a tattoo because I'm too fickle. Again, it's
Me
probably
too.
a Libra thing, but I
Yeah.
have had ideas that have stuck with me for about 5 years. Like my mom's side of the family are all Norwegian settlers, and I want to get like a little Norwegian ship. And I also
Mm.
have wanted for a long time a tattoo of one of Barack Obama's statements from the 2016 Democratic National Convention when he said, "We don't look to be ruled." And I thought, okay, I
Mm.
find myself thinking that every day. So, do I want that on my body? I'm still not sure for the big decisions like that. That seems sort of irreversible. I sit with them. And the same is true for committing to a creative project. Like, I have a lot of ideas popping like popcorn, but if I lock into a book, I'm going to be in that book for probably about, I want to say 3 to 5 years with production and promotion, let alone the writing. So I really want to make sure that I'm committed to that relationship before I dive in and get put under contract and so on.
Yeah, another mentor of mine gave me the idea of the not to do list, which I've really taken to heart. I have many to do lists, and then I have one not to do list, and that applies for the day to day, but also the big projects of I had, she labels it a never gonna happen project list. And the idea of putting it on paper and just tucking it away is actionable enough for that person that she feels complete. And I don't go to that level because I resonate with it differently, but definitely for the day to day, I'm writing, okay, this is what I want to get done. This is the reality of what I'm going to actually get done today. And that's okay.
I love that. It's a really interesting thing. So the not to do list is the things that you're actually not going to do, but you wish you could do, like the
Well,
people wish.
this individual in particular, has two. One is the micro, this is what I want to do. And then she crosses off the not to do's because it gets in her way of what she really needs to do. And then she has a bigger list of projects that are like the never gonna happen list. And the idea of that is it's probably, in this case, financially not sustainable for what she's doing. And so, even though she would love to be doing this thing, she crosses it off or puts it on that list because it's just not sustainable for what she's doing at the time and it distracts her from the bigger picture.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a way of getting it out of your head so it's not persistently there tapping you on the shoulder, right?
Exactly.
I love that.
Totally. And
Sorry, go ahead.
no, please.
I have
What
a
were you
bunch of
thinking?
those. They were like book outlines that were on my wall. I didn't have the name of the list for it, but that's what it is. I have all of these ideas, especially between books, which I am right now. This is my least favorite part, aside from beginning a creative project, is that time when you're sort of germinating and you're letting the soil rest because you just produce something with it, but you want to be working. Like I get antsy when I'm not working, and I'm more grounded when I am working. So I have all these ideas on my wall and I'm looking at them going, like I'm not in love with any of them and I'm waiting for one of them to really seize me. And so it's nice to think of that being a sanctioned space for them as opposed to just being sort of irritable.
Totally. I have a project that I actually started for my middle school music tech project, and it's called Campfire. And the idea of it was, and I won't go too far into it because I don't think it's super relevant, but it was an app that I was making. And it took me, probably because I started when I was younger, enough, too much time to get to where I was going. And so other brains and other creatives sort of beat me to the punch with it. But I made a series of clothing for it, and I labeled it the work in progress clothing because I really felt strongly about wearing, like, this was my idea, and it started me on a lot of different paths of like, I know that this might not happen the way I wanted it to happen, but I'm going to wear it on my head because it was my idea. And when people ask me about it, I say it's a project that I love to think about. And it's never going to be complete in the way I think we think of a complete business. And that's kind of the beauty of it, I think. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Totally makes sense. It's like a wistful note. I mean, you made something that didn't exist before, so you did make it. It just didn't come to fruition the way you had hoped it would. But I don't think we can do all of our
yes,
ideas. We just
no,
can't. I mean, most of us have very fruitful imaginations, and there are so many excellent ideas. I don't know if this is true for you, but when I get together with other entrepreneurs or other creatives, then I'm like, oh, we should totally do this. Oh, we should totally do that. Oh, we should do it. And I have learned to, instead of chasing all those squirrels, again, just kind of let them run around and see which one comes back to me with a big nut in its mouth and is like really persistent. But I think there's nothing wrong with, in fact, I think it's delightful to celebrate that idea coming into being however you can, even if you're not going to extrapolate it all the way out. And I'm sorry if somebody beat you to the punch. That sucks.
no, I think it's great because they did it better, honestly. And it caused me to take a step back. I was sort of in the development phase at the time, and the person I was working with said, you could still do this just differently. And I said, well, how? And he said, I don't know. It's your idea. You figure it out. But I said, oh, okay. And I don't know if I'll go back and sort of redo or reinvent, but I loved the idea of this. He was a computer software engineer, and this man said to me, I was like, "Oh, it's done. They beat me to it." And he said, "So what? How many music lesson studios out there are there?" And you said, "Oh, I'm going to do it too." I don't know. It's like seems like a very similar but different idea of like some things we go for and say, well, there's a bunch of restaurants out there, but I'm going to open one too. And that seems super normal. And some projects, it seems like really out there. I don't know. What do you think?
I think there's room for a lot of fertility with creative ideas and creative projects, not just the ideas, but the projects themselves. Yeah, we need more than one restaurant to eat in. We need more than one book to read. We need more than one song to sing, more than one type of song to sing. I think it's also about time in some ways.
Mm.
Like sometimes I have this fanciful idea that there's like one idea pool out there. And then sometimes, if you're unlucky, two artists reach into that pool at the same time and pull out like the same idea or the same facet of the idea. And whoever gets it first is like, okay, now I've written or sung or created or built this thing, built an app. But I think if you give it a couple of years and you try again, then what is old is new again suddenly, right? And you probably have developed that idea. This happened to me with my second book, which is called The Storm Chasers. It's about a set of boy girl twins, and the boy is bipolar and his sister is not. And I wrote this as my master's thesis when I was at VU. And the day I graduated from that program, I walked into the Barnes and Noble to sort of buy myself a gift as a reward. And there was a book on the front table called I Know This Much Is True by Wally Lamb, which is about twins, one of whom is schizophrenic. And I was like, well, there goes my last year of work. And I still tried to market my new book. And the agents were like, we cannot, I mean, we love the writing, but we can't represent this. It looks plagiarized. Like, you can't do it. So 10 years later, I returned to that idea and I expanded the idea. And it was like a little bit different, but not much. And then the book is my second book and it's out in the world. So I think there's never a shelf life on a really good idea or project.
So I think we need to rename the not to do list to the maybe later list.
Give it 5 years list and nobody wants to hear that, but like the someday list. It's like the someday list.
I saw for those who watch SpongeBob, there's like a clip in it that's like 3 years later. And I always joke around. I always put it on the top of my documents when I send it to people because I'm like, we'll do this 3 years later or 5 years later. And I just think, just to be silly about it. But it's true, it's the dot, dot, dot. I think that counts.
I agree. It's also a weird thing about a creative life or a creative profession is it's also a great thing. It's lifelong. So when I hear my friends talking about retirement or they want to do this in 10 years or they want to do this in 5 or 15 years or whatever when they retire, I'm like, I don't understand the concept. Like I'll be hopefully 99 years old and still sitting there writing. Like that is
Sure.
my aspiration and creating things. And so as unnerving as it is to think, oh, I have to put this off now for a year or two or five or whatever, we have our whole lives to indulge in the
Mm.
maybe someday list. Whereas I think other professions curtail that more.
Do you think that's different for something like, I'm going to separate it into you being a solopreneur as a writer and you being a business leader in a Mighty Blaze where you have a team. Do you look at those things differently? Like, do you see a retirement plan for one and not for the other?
That's a great question. No, actually, I think Blaze is like my beloved pet, and hopefully it will live forever and ever. I think as long as I have other creative people to work with me on it, it will just go and go and go. It is one of these things I can do from a chair. And writing is also something that I can do from a chair, right? So as long as I have the mental capacity to do both of those things, I'll continue to champion other writers and I'll continue to write books. I think any creative profession that relies on your physicality is maybe a little different. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like I sit in a chair on a deadline now. I have like lazy glutes, it's like, oh my God, I have to get up and get hiking. But it's not like I'm a singer where you're dealing with your vocal cords or an actor when you're partly at least reliant on your appearance and your physicality. So I have no retirement plan. I mean, I'm gonna go forever if I can.
I love that. Here's what I would say about the singing part too, because you make a good point about the physicality of it. And I also want to bring in the idea of the business component of it. I think this is the idea of having more than one revenue stream as a creative. If you, and it's very real, right? If you're a vocal athlete and you compete on a high level and you experience fatigue, which is, it's not the goal, but the reality of use and maybe overuse in some cases, and you're feeling like you need to pivot, can you still do what you love and make money in a different capacity?
Really good question. I think that's why so many of us are also teachers like you, and you're an
Right.
excellent teacher. I think that it's really important. People don't talk about money enough. Like people in the creative
Mhm.
professions don't talk about it. And yet everybody thinks about it. And when I do larger speaking engagements, one of the questions from the audience is always like, how do you make money? And then the assumption is if you write books, they're like, oh, you must be rich. You write books. I'm like, are you insane? I get paid every 5 years. So and you can always grab the brass ring in some way as any sort of creative professional. And that's partly what keeps me going, I think, is a sort of gambler's streak where I'm like, okay, this book is going to be an Oprah book. This book, and you get a car, and you get a car, and you get a car. But I think it's really important to look at your skill set and say, what else can I do that will make me happy so that I'm not solely reliant on the creative revenue stream because that puts so much pressure on that thing. I will say this as a veteran of doing that very thing. Like my books are my main source of income, but I'm also a public speaker. I'm also a teacher. I'm also an editor, and I run the Blaze. The Blaze is not a giant money making venture. It is more like a good literary citizen goodwill venture, but still, it's important to know what else can you do so you're not leaning so hard on something that is mysterious and mercurial.
Jenna, I get a little frustrated and stubborn sometimes because people say to me, I started this and I continue with it because it's a labor of love, right? But I've had different people in my life say, well, it's a labor, and eventually you have to choose between doing this and like a main profession, or you have to choose what to dive into because you only have a limited time. And it drives me a little. I dig my feet in and I say, well, why? Why do I have to do that? And time is valuable. I'm not gonna argue that. But I think so often we get into this idea of like, I have a limited number of time, so I have to cap this or that. And it's really, to me, it's like, I'm not going to cap the things I love. I'm just going to reallocate or redistribute the time according to what I'm needing in my life at the moment.
I think that's very smart. We also make time for the things that we need to make time for. I constantly hear myself saying, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for this. Nah, getting really cranky about it or adding something to the schedule. And then I think you absolutely have the time. You're talking about choice. If you don't want to do something, then say you don't want to do it or you can't do it. But if you do want to do something, you make the time for it. And I don't cap what I love. I do think time is our most valuable resource. It's time and health are our most valuable resources. So the things that interfere with that are the things that make me the crankiest. But I really try to protect the time to do what I love. When I'm working on a book, if people come to me with any sort of problem or can you do this task or can you help me with this, I am really awful. Like I am an awful human being because I'll be like, what did I just say? I'm on deadline. I can't. And it's not practicable all the time. Like life is life. It's always going to interfere with your creative time, but I try to protect it as much as possible. And I don't want to give it up. Why would I do that?
Right. Totally agree. And I will say, I work with I work next to, I should say, a surgeon in a very well known hospital. And I won't say any names because I don't know if they'd want to be quoted. But she said to me, if you're having trouble, pick up the phone and call somebody because I'm always going to pick up because I want someone else to do the same for me. So if you're ever having trouble, if you feel like you're financially like unsure of where to go in your work or you're not allocating time correctly, pick up the phone and call someone and talk it through because chances are it's not an issue of what you're doing, but how you're doing it. And I just loved that because if this surgeon could say this to me, whose time is worth a lot, said to me, oh, I can always pick up the phone, I can too. And I hope someone else will do that for me as well. So um, I also wanted to put that thought out there.
Community is really important, especially for those of us in the creative arts who are trying to make a living at it. I couldn't do it without my community. I stayed in Boston, came here because of grad school, went to Boston University, and stayed here because of an outfit called Grub Street Writers, which used to be downtown on the Common and is now on the seaport. And it gave me something very rare that I had not found in my life before, which was a constant feed of other people who thought like me, who believed that our imaginary people were just as real as the people at the workshop table and understood the strange pressures and joys of trying to make a living this way by inventing things or channeling things out of thin air. And I'm still friends with most of those people. A lot of them work with me on the Blaze. So I feel as though they all have taught me what you're talking about, which is if you get into some sort of trouble or you just need help with something, just ask for something. Like there was some point during the pandemic when I said, "Oh, I'm really chagrined, but I have to ask for help with this particular project." And my friend Mark was like, "What do you mean you're chagrined? You ask for help all day, every day. Like that's what you do." And I took that as a great compliment because I thought that is a muscle I've been trying to build to ask for help and not be isolated in my doubt or my confusion or, how do I make money at this? Any sort of question. And I'm ignorant in a lot of areas, and I'm fine asking the questions to compensate for my ignorance or lack of skill in a certain sector.
I love that. I don't even want to add something on top of that. I think everyone should pause, rewind, listen again. I could talk to Jenna forever, but I don't want to take too much of her time here. But I always ask one final question of all our guests. If you were to give one practical tip that our listeners could come back to, what would it be?
I mean, my stock advice is to never give in. I don't know how practical that actually is, but I do feel as though determination is just as important a part of any sort of creative success as the talent or the skill set that you're building, the sort of artisan skill set that you're building, the talent you were born with. There has to be a certain amount of grit. And I think that the older I get, the more forgiving I am of myself in terms of how to manifest and deploy that grit. It used to be like if I never give in, I was like a fire breathing dragon, like sitting at my desk being like, I'm gonna publish this book or else. And now I'm like, okay, I'm gonna work for 3 hours today instead of 8 hours a day, and then I'm gonna go hiking. So a little bit of self-forgiveness applied as a salve with that grit is important, but you really have to believe in yourself and you really have to keep going.
So, what I heard from that is never give up, and also never give up on the joy of it, of taking the break and coming back to it. I really like that.
Yeah, those things balance out too. Like you do need a little bit of life in with your creative life. I think you need to swirl that together like a twisty cone.
I love that. Thank you so much, Jenna, for coming on and talking to us and giving some of your expertise and insights. Again, we're going to link all of Jenna's work and experience there. So I encourage all of our listeners and watchers to take a look at that and hopefully learn something new. I know I always do when I talk to Jenna, and more to come, more conversations coming your way.
Thank you. Thank you, Arabella. I just think you are the best.
Well, thank you. All right, talk soon. I'm going to